She described this person in detail and described the car. And we didn't know anybody with a white car at the time. We didn't know anybody that looked like that. So combining that with my own memories as a child, I just thought, well, maybe reincarnation is true. And the more I thought about it, I thought, the most reasonable explanation is that it is.
Welcome to the podcast, Mike. I'm excited to hear about your very interesting story of yours about your daughter. I understand that your story briefly appeared in Jim Tucker's book, Return to Life. For the audience, Jim Tucker is a researcher in the area of past life at the University of Virginia. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say and have maybe a little bit more details about that experience. So why don't you go ahead and start by introducing yourself and tell us, what led to your understanding that your daughter had a past life?
Sure. It was 1988, and my daughter was about 3 years old. And lucky for me, I worked evenings and weekends, and my wife worked during the days. So we didn't have to put my daughter in daycare. And so basically, she had no exposure to hockey. So that's important to understand for the story. When I was a boy, my father was a big sports fan, loved hockey, and taught me how to skate at an early age, but I didn't like skating. I fell down on the ice and it hurt, and he tried to get me to play hockey, and I'd get checked, and I fell down and it got hurt. And so I just said to my dad, I don't like hockey. And I think it disappointed my father. He really wanted his boy to like hockey like he liked hockey. So when I met my wife, I told her, I said, we'll get along fine as long as we don't watch hockey. I said, I got a problem with hockey. I think it kind of ruined my relationship with my father because I wouldn't play hockey. So like I said, I watched my daughter during the daytime and my wife watched her at night. So she wasn't exposed to anybody else. She wasn't babysat, so she wouldn't have been exposed to hockey. And so one day I was playing with her. We had these little Playmobil people we were playing with. And she said to me, Daddy, why doesn't my son come to see me anymore? And at first I thought she was just playing, like pretending to be one of the little people. And I said, well, I don't know. But then she asked it again and again. She said, Daddy, why doesn't my son come to see me anymore? So I said, well, what do you mean? What son? And she says, well, he's my tall son. And I said, well, what's he look like? And she said, well, he's skinny. He's got orange curly hair. She didn't say the word red. She said orange. And she said he has a jacket like mine. And at the time, I had a black bomber leather jacket, a leather jacket that just came down to the waist. So I said, like Daddy's jacket? She says, yeah, but it's brown and it's longer. And I said, okay. And still, I'm not quite sure if she's playing or not. And so I said to her, well, why did he come to see you? When did he come to see you? And she says, well, he came to pick me up to go to the hockey games. And that just gave me goosebumps. I thought, okay, well, she's never seen a hockey game. How does she know this word? And so I said to her, well, where was the hockey game? And she says, at the arena. She actually used the word arena. And she had never been to an arena. And then I said to her, well, okay, when? When did this happen? When did your son come to see you? She says, oh, Daddy, when I was an old lady. And so I kind of got goosebumps all over me. Now, I didn't have any particular beliefs in reincarnation at the time or past lives. I knew about it, obviously. And there's some things from my own past, like memories I had when I was a child, that made me kind of wonder about it. But I didn't have any hard, firm beliefs about reincarnation. So for about 3-4 weeks, I would keep asking her questions. When my wife came home, I said, you got to watch this, listen to this conversation. And excuse me, I'd ask my daughter again, tell me about your son. She described a white car. We had a brown car. She described holes in the car at the bottom. And I pointed to a neighbor's car. I said, holes like that, and where the rust was. And she says, yeah, my son's car's got holes like that. And I tried to find out what his name was. And for some reason, she didn't seem to remember his name. She just kept on repeating that he would come to see her when she was an old lady.
So this happened sort of suddenly, and it must have been surprising.
Yes,
I would
yes,
imagine.
yes,
And at first, I would also imagine that you probably question that experience.
yes.
And so, is there anything about the experience itself, what she said, or demeanor, or anything at all that finally convinced you this was actually a past life going on here? That it was not a little girl just fantasizing.
Well, yes. I think the part that convinced me most of all is how adamant she was that this was real. And I mean, she's a bright girl. Even today, she's a bright girl. She learned how to talk really early. She walked before she was a year old, so she's a very bright girl. And so I've never known her to fib or lie. So it just, to me, it just seemed too authentic. Plus all the details. Now, it's nothing quite as detailed as some of your other guests and stories that you've had, where people remember where they lived and names and stuff like that. I tried to probe that for a few weeks. I kept on saying, "Well, what was your name?" And she would just say, "Well, it was me, Daddy. It was me. I was an old lady." So there was a little bit of a miscommunication. There was a little bit, maybe she wasn't remembering everything, but I was really convinced because nobody had babysat her. I was a bit of a overprotective parent. She was babysat the first time when she was about 9 years old by my parents. She went to stay at my parents' house. Nobody else had ever babysat her. So I talked to my wife. I said, "Did you ever play hockey when I wasn't home?" Trying to figure out if there's any way she could have learned about hockey. And no, my wife had not watched any hockey while I wasn't home. So I was just convinced by the fact that she had never been to an arena at that time, had never seen hockey before, and yet she knew what an arena was. She knew the word hockey. And she described this person in quite detail, that he was skinny, about my height, wore a leather coat like mine but longer and brown, had a white car with holes in it. It was just so much detail. And I started, like I say, I tried to ask, "Do you remember your name? Do you remember your boy's name, your son's name?" And she didn't seem to.
Yeah, that's too bad because then that would have given you maybe some information you could go by to really
Right.
track this down,
Yeah,
right?
and I asked her, I said,
That's
"Well, where,"
always,
yeah, sorry. I asked her where she lived at the time, and she said, "Here, Daddy, here." And I don't know what that meant, like if she was confused that she lived in this house or if she was just trying to say like in the same city. Like I say, she was only about 3.5 at the time. But, why I commented is I'm convinced about this because I watched some of your other videos. I've really enjoyed your videos.
thank you.
I like your approach, and that was one of the reasons why I commented. I'm a bit of a skeptic myself. I mean, I believe in God and all that kind of stuff, but I'm really skeptical when people tell me stories. And yet, in my own life, I've had things happen that I can't explain. And the first video of yours that I watched was about near-death experiences. And I had made a comment on there that I had had a near-death experience in high school, but that was not what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about a memory I had when I was an infant. Now, I can't remember being born, but I remember so much from my early childhood. And you replied to my comment and you said that it was rare, but there were some people who did not have infant amnesia. And I can remember when I was very young having what felt like memories of people that, and of course, I didn't know anything about reincarnation as an infant or a child. Up to age 4, I had these memories. And, but I also had this out of body experience. My mother used to wrap me up in something called a bunting blanket. Now, I'm not sure if young mothers still do that. It's very tight. They wrap the baby up. Supposedly, it gives them comfort, but I would panic. But I was too young to talk, and I couldn't tell her I was panicking. And one day, a friend of hers came over, and we were going to go in the car someplace, and my mother had me wrapped up in the bunting blanket, and I was panicking. And as she went to put me in the car, I went into super panic mode, and I saw myself about 5 or 6 feet above the car looking down, and I saw myself in my mother's arms, and then next thing you know, I'm right back in the body. Now, I remember that as clear as if it happened yesterday. And I've always wondered about that, like what caused that. And as I got older and I learned about out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, I thought, well, maybe that had something to do with it, the same type of thing where the the soul comes out of the body and sees that. And so combining that with these memories I used to have when I was a small boy, and I would ask my mother, did we live in a house with a carpet like such and such? And she said no. And I could remember a carpet, I could remember these people. And so then when this happened with my daughter, I put this all together in my head and I thought, you know what? I think I believe in reincarnation. I think I believe in past lives. I mean, I've got no proof of it, but just blending the two things together, I became convinced.
That makes sense, because having your own experience will obviously make you more open to others' experience, especially your own daughter, because you're going to trust your own daughter over
Right.
anyone else. I have a question about your own experience as well, since you mentioned that. What came to mind when you were talking about that is when you came out of your body. First of all, you think it's the panic that caused you to
Right.
snap
Yes.
out of your body, right?
Yes.
And I've heard about experiences like that before. And then you saw yourself from above. What I'm really interested in is understanding people's experience when they have that out of body experience, whether it's a near death experience or just straight out of body experience. What did things look like? What did things sound like? Were there any different than the experience you typically have, from day to day?
It pretty much seemed the same. Like I say, I can see everything. I can see my mother putting me into the car, the back seat. There wasn't a lot of safety stuff back then. Like not a lot of people used, chairs for kids, and I was just laid on the back seat of the car. And yeah, everything just looked normal. And I just remember feeling kind of puzzled. And then next thing you know, I'm back in. I didn't feel emotion going back in. I was just next thing you know, I was back in.
Back to your daughter?
Sure.
And we can come back to your experience as well, because I think that's very interesting. Was there a sense as to how long ago her past life occurred?
Well, like I say, she talked about a car and a leather coat and going to a hockey arena. So I'm assuming it was, fairly recent. And the way she said, a couple of times she said, well, it was when I was an old lady, because I kept on asking her, when was this? And so I'm going to assume, obviously it's since we've had automobiles. But no, I can't really tell you if it was like, the 70s. I mean, she was born in the 80s, so I can't tell if it was in the 70s or the 60s or 50s or whatever.
And it sounded like it was local, right? Because she said something about, well, when you ask her, where did this happen? She said, here.
Here, yes.
Yeah. So, and whatever here means, right? I mean, that
Right,
could mean
yeah.
anything.
Yes.
But yeah.
And she doesn't remember it today. Like even when she was like 6 and 7, I would ask her if she remembered telling me. Then she doesn't remember it. It's just totally gone.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, if she remembered anything about that experience. What is common? We talked a little bit about that in those comments on my other video, I remember. But what is common is what's known as infantile amnesia, so that children remember certain things and then they start to forget at about 3 to 4 years of age. So beyond that point, it's really difficult for people
Right.
to know what happened to them, what the experiences were before 3 or 4 years of age. So that will be typical. How old was she when she had that experience?
About 3.5.
3.5. So that's right along that line. So, and that's too bad. Does she believes that she had a past life experience today, or no? Is she
Well, I can't speak for her, to be honest with you. You'd have to ask her in private, I guess, because she's her and her husband both converted to the Catholic Church, and of course the Catholic Church does not teach reincarnation, and she works for the Catholic Church. So I can't say yes or no to that question. I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I was also going to ask you if when she was reporting this past life experience, if there was any sign that she was sad about it, because you hear about that a lot too, that they want to reconnect with the old family and that kind of thing.
There was a combination of some sadness, but mostly a frustration. She seemed very frustrated that I didn't seem to know what she was talking about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because she really believed that happened, and therefore she was frustrated that you couldn't connect on that level.
The part that convinces me is, number one, she was never babysat. She never saw hockey, but she mentioned hockey. She described this person in detail and described the car. And We didn't know anybody with a white car at the time. We didn't know anybody that looked like that. So combining that with my own memories as a child, I just thought, well, maybe reincarnation is true. And the more I thought about it, I thought, the most reasonable explanation is that it is. I mean, there's possible other explanations like cosmic consciousness and just picking up a memory from somebody else. There's all kinds of other ways of maybe trying to figure this out. But, using Occam's razor, I think the simplest solution is that there's just reincarnation.
Did your daughter's experience and also your own experiences change your beliefs in any way?
Well, it changed my beliefs, yes, by that time. I've always been very inquisitive, and I worked as a part-time pastor when my children were young. Well, up until recently, I just retired recently. I ran my own business as well. But, as a person born and raised in I was born and raised in the Anglican Church, and there's no reincarnation in the Anglican Church. So, yeah, my views did change. I just thought, well, no, I think there is. I know what the church teaches, but I'm sorry. I've got to go by my experiences. And especially, like going back to my own experience when I was a boy. I remember eating baby food in the high chair. And here's some of the reasons. Here's some of the things I was able to confirm to prove that my memories were real and not made up. My father was in his 20s when I was born. My mother was in her teens. And I remember when I was an infant, couldn't talk yet, I was not feeling well. I was sick, and my mother went to see some friends. And she passed me over to this woman, and my nose was all clogged up. And this woman used a Q-tip to clean my nose out. Well, many years later, when I was older and I could talk, I asked my mother about this. I said, Mom, I've got this memory of you giving me to this lady when I'm a baby, cleaning my nose out. And she says, how do you remember that? You were really young. And she said, well, I was scared I was going to hurt you. You were my first kid, and I never cleaned out a baby's nose before. This other woman had kids before. I handed you to her to let her do it because I was afraid of hurting you. And she says, I'm just amazed you remember it because you were just a baby. And then the other thing I asked her later is I remember being in my high chair and my father feeding me. And when I got older, it dawned on me from watching TV and listening to my other friends that mothers feed the babies, not the dads. So I asked my mother about this as well. And I said, how come I remember Dad feeding me in the high chair? And she says, well, I was afraid I'd choke you. I never had a kid before. And she said, I'd feed you and you'd cough, and I was so afraid you're going to choke that I'd have your dad feed you before he went to work and when he got home. So I was able to confirm that these memories I had were real.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting how you can forget most of what happened to you at an early age, but some things will come through.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the mysteries of the brain. We don't understand everything about the brain yet, how it works, and memory in particular. It's a huge area of research nowadays, but there's so much about it that we don't understand. In terms of past life experiences, it really makes you wonder how many of us remembered those past lives when we were younger, and then now we're just sort of in denial, or we just have no clue.
Well, exactly,
because we forgot all of it.
And this is why I bring up my infant memories, because I had this memory of this place, and I actually remember the bed. And I asked my mother, did we ever live a place where they had a bed? Like the bed had a canopy over it, right? It was a kind of a rich-looking old house. And I asked my mother, did we ever live in a place like that? And she said no. And of course, when I was asking my mother this, I was like 6, 7, 8 years old. And I said, when I was little, I remember a carpet. And I tried to explain it to her because I didn't know what the word, like Persian carpet. I didn't know what a Persian carpet was. I didn't know the word for it. And I said to my mother, I said, I remember us living in a place, I assumed it was us, where we had this carpet that had all these colors in it. And she said, no, we've never had a carpet like that. So I had all these memories, and there was all these people there too, and I can remember what they looked like. And so when my daughter had this experience, I just thought, well, that must have been what I was having. I must have been having some sort of memories of a past life, because there's no other explanation why I could remember these people and this bed and this carpet.
You said something about having had a near-death experience. Is that related to the out-of-body experience, or was that something different?
That was in that was in high school, and that was interesting. It was very short. I was in high school, and I guess I just fell, And I was so out of it that when I was coming to, I thought I was waking up in my bedroom. And I saw all my buddies standing around me. And I said to them, I said, "What are you guys doing in my bedroom?" And they all laughed. And they said, "Well, Mike, you just fell down." And so they took me down to the nurse. And then I had to go for all these tests at the hospital. But when I fell down, um, I was going through this tunnel, just like everybody talks about. And I had never read anything about that yet. I would read about that later in my 20s. I'm going through this weird tunnel, and you know when you look at the sky and there's clouds and you can see the sunbeams coming out? Well, coming down the tunnel were kind of like these sunbeams. And as I'm going through the tunnel, there's a guy standing there, and I kind of stopped, and it didn't feel like I was walking. It felt like I was just being pulled. And there was somebody there, and it kind of scared me at first. And he looked at me, and he tilted his head, kind of like when you're talking to a dog and the dog's trying to understand you. He tilted his head as he looked at me, and then he pointed behind me, and I went backwards. And next thing you know, these guys are picking me up at school and waking me up. So then I went to the doctors. I went to the hospital. I had to have all kinds of tests, nuclear brain scan, CAT scan, all those things. I had to have all these tests done. And I'm not a doctor, and I was a teenager at the time, and they were telling my mother this, and I'm just listening. But they said that my heart had stopped and that there was some sort of damage to the top part of my brain or something for lack of oxygen or something. I just wanted to get out of there. I don't like hospitals. I just wanted to go. So I didn't pay too much attention to it. But all I remember hearing is they said that my heart had stopped for some reason and to keep an eye on me. They weren't sure why.
Wow. So that does sound like a near-death experience because
Yeah,
if
it's
your
very
heart had
brief though.
stopped, yeah, sure. So how did you feel after that? Did you question that experience? Did you know it was a near-death experience? Or
I just thought I passed out. I
Mm.
didn't think about near death. I wasn't even interested. I remember when they were taking me down to the nurse's office in the school. I said, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. Let me just go back to class." They said, "No, you can't go back to class." And then they said, "Oh, you got to go to the hospital. You got to." I said, "I don't want to go to the hospital." I had no interest in that. I had a sporting event that night that I wanted to go to, and they told me I couldn't go to that. I had to rest for a while, and I was really actually kind of upset by all the fuss. But then years later, I read, was it Dr. Moody came out with some of those books, and I was reading one of those, and I saw about the tunnels, and I thought, well, that's kind of like what happened to me, and so that made me start to think, well, maybe it was a near-death experience.
sure. Well, it sounds like a typical one, even if it's a short one. And during that experience, did you feel that the experience itself was qualitatively different than,
Well,
or was it like, did it feel more like a dream
no,
or
it
did
felt
it
more
have a,
real than real. I would have to say that. Yeah,
okay,
it felt
okay.
more real than real. Like I really thought I was going through this tunnel, and the lights that were these beams of light, they weren't bright. They were just like sunbeams coming down through it. There was some color to them, kind of a goldy, bright goldy yellow, and there was like a pale blue and a salmony color, kind of gray salmon. I don't know how to explain it. It's a little bit different. But they were just kind of passing by me as I was going towards the light until I saw that guy.
Sounds like pastel colors, would you
Yes,
say?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And often people report seeing colors they've never seen before.
right, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, that's fascinating. So you're full of fascinating stories, Mike.
Well, yeah. I mean,
You've,
that's why
mhm.
the reason I contacted you was simply because I thought you sounded like the best person to talk to because, I've
Thank
tried
you.
talking to some other people, and some people are just kind of really out there into weird stuff, and it's like I don't want someone to confirm this for me and say that, oh yeah, this is great, Mike. I want something someone's a little bit more skeptical because I'm skeptical about them. Like I think to myself, well, maybe I just passed out, maybe it was just a dream. Like I because I was born and raised. I'm almost 70, and we're born and raised in a society that tells us this stuff doesn't exist, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so when it happens, you think, okay,
Right.
well, am I a little bit nuts or what's going on?
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. No, we are conditioned to believe in certain things and not others. That is clear. That is part of our culture. We've adopted science as the only way to the truth. And while science is awesome, science is a great tool, it's the best tool that we have to get at any truth. It does have its shortcomings. And one of them is biases. previous opinions, personal opinions, and then the fear of being an outcast by sort of, depending on what you believe in or what you decide to
Right.
research. When I entered science, I was extremely interested in consciousness. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? I believed it came from the brain. It was created by the brain. And I was really interested in finding consciousness inside the brain. And that never happened and never will. And that's when I start to realize there's something about consciousness that is different than the material world that we know. So I stopped being a materialist. In fact, if you look at physics, the findings in physics, there are a few physicists now who are materialists because all of physics tell you the world is not material. It's not physical in the sense that we understand something being physical. So I came to the understanding that, there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot of mysteries concerning consciousness. And I came to believe that if consciousness is separate from the brain, that it is not created by the brain. It is not an emergent property of the brain.
Right.
If it is something that exists in and of itself, and I think there's more and more evidence that supports that. If that is the case, then there's no reason to believe that it does not continue beyond death.
Right.
That's how I became interested in near-death experiences and past life experiences and this type of thing. It certainly makes life interesting when you incorporate these notions to understand that the possibility is definitely solid, that these things actually do exist. And there's nothing in science that could disprove that either.
No.
So, yeah. So anyway, well, I really enjoy talking to you and hearing about your experiences. I wish I had some of those experiences. I have to resort to the fact, sort of accept the fact that I'm just going to have to live surreptitiously through others and, listen to other stories. And maybe one day I will have we all will at death, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no avoiding that, right?
No. Yeah.
But yeah, so is there anything you want to add or that you can think of, or do you think you've provided all the details?
I think for this particular topic, I think that's pretty much all I've got. I wish there was more. I wish I got more information from my daughter. But I really appreciate you having me on so I can just share this. As I get closer, my father died when he was 61, and my grandfather when he was 61, and my great-grandfather when he was 57. So I'm 68, so a couple years away from 70. And I just thought, I really should share some of this with somebody before I cross over myself, because there might be other people out there that have had similar experiences. And then if they hear someone else share theirs, then they might feel brave to come forward and share theirs.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good reasoning on your part. Yeah, you're absolutely correct, 100%. So is there any place or anything you could tell our audience here in terms of finding more about the experiences that you just revealed, like especially maybe your daughter's experience?
Just in Jim Tucker's book, I had originally contacted Dr. Ian Stevenson about this. Now, he's since passed away, but and he thought that it was a genuine experience himself. And then when I saw that Jim Tucker was coming out with a book, I thought, well, I should let him know about this. And again, just basically to share, just so people say, because I think some people are nervous to talk about this. I was for a long time, right? I was trying to get confirmation for it, but I didn't really want to put it out there into cyberspace like we're doing right now.
Sure.
But as I'm getting older, I think, well, no, I think people need to hear these so that they don't feel alone if they've had one too.
Yeah, no, but there's certainly a stigma attached to these experiences. So when you start to reveal them, it takes courage. Yeah. You're a brave man.
Thank you.
No. Yeah, awesome.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this, and it's been great to talk to you. I love your videos. I'll continue watching them.
Thank you.
They're really, really fun to watch.
Awesome. Well, you've been a great, fantastic guest, and so I'm really happy you came on the show. Thank you, Mike.